In the last episode, I presented the Enuma Elish and the Babylonian deity Tiamat as a way to introduce my own take on dragons in my modern mythologies. Now it is high time we start discussing some dragons. To recap, although dragon is more of an umbrella term, in my modern mythologies they are a specific group of chimeric, magically altered reptiles whose origins are directly, or indirectly, traced to the residual essence of the slain Tiamat. I also came up with some related extra lore in my spare time, but it's a lot to dump in one video, so I'll be slowly introducing my ideas with each dragon episode. Today I decided our first dragon would be the most appropriate for this year's zodiac sign, the Chinese dragon. The Chinese dragon, pronounced Long in the Chinese language, is one of the most renowned and revered creatures in Chinese culture and the draconic umbrella at large. Whether it was folklore, religion, history, literature, zoology, architecture, festivals, art, and names and idioms, they were everywhere in ancient China and continue to loom in the Chinese psyche. Despite this, there are still elements about it that most people either don't really know or have misunderstood. Before I go on, I want to say that there is going to be a lot of material to cover, more so than what is needed to get to the point. While I have done my best to provide as much of the information I found for this video, there will be parts where I can only briefly mention things rather than go into detail. However, I'm more than happy to answer any associated questions that might come up in the comments. I also want to say that a huge portion of this episode's material comes from an archived copy of Dr. M.W. de Visser's 1913 book, The Dragon in China and Japan, which I will link below the video. And I'm probably going to mispronounce most, if not all, the Chinese names and words, so I apologize in advance. Now, dragons have been present in Chinese culture for a very long time, and as such, there's lots of information about them that often contradicts each other, so much so that I'm genuinely concerned on whether I can convey everything clearly and concisely. I can only do my best in that respect, starting with what a Chinese dragon looks like. Although its image was roughly established as early as the Shang and Zhao dynasty, no one was certain on what these creatures looked like, and artists each had their own interpretations. Some attempted to expound on its appearance, like Han Dynasty scholar Wang Fu, who offered two descriptions. One where people painted them with a horse's head and a snake's tail, and another with 9 resemblances, or 9 characteristics of other animals, which are listed here. He also gave it a broad lump on its head called a chimu, as well as 3 joints dividing its body into sections of equal length. Though this definition is frequently referenced today, it wasn't always universally accepted, and several other variations and details appeared. Sinologist Henry Doré described them with similar features while also listing different traits, and in many other countries, they instead had all the attributes of the other 11 animals of the Chinese zodiac. Dragons during the Eastern Han Dynasty had dog-like bodies and thin tails until the Tang Dynasty, with their claw number ranging between 2 and 5, and flames often emanating from their shoulders and hips. 117 scales were commonly thought to cover their bodies, with Han Dynasty philosopher Han Fei adding that there were certain 30 centimeter wide opposite pointing scales under their throats. Most were given colors according to the philosophical model of the Wuxing, but there are others appearing with unrelated colors, with L. Newton Hayes citing an unnamed Yuan Dynasty book saying they had 3-foot-long purple whiskers. According to the Penziao Kongmu, their bones were also differently colored according to this model. Their blood may either be red or black, and Wang Fu additionally described their cry sounding like struck copper basins. Their physical sex fluctuated between texts, with some saying they were exclusively male and others claiming females had certain differences. In his 1833 study, Xiu Wen Tongsheng Dingsheng, Qing Dynasty phonologist Zhu Zhongsheng proposed that only male dragons were horned. The Guangpo Wei Qi, however, contradictingly implied that both had horns, with male horns being undulating, concave, and strong at the top while steep at the bottom, and females having straight noses, round manes, thin scales, and strong tails, whatever that means. According to Charles Gould, their bones also differed from each other, with male bones being thick with narrow veins, and female bones being thinner with broader veins. Found in mountains or alongside rivers, their eggs are rarely referenced but generally thought to resemble beautiful stones and be filled with a lot of water, hatching amidst darkness, thunder, and rain. An egg described by the author of the 11th century text, and I'm probably going to butcher this, Meng Qi Tan, was allegedly preserved in a case in the Jinshan Temple in what is now Zhenjiang, resembling a large hen's egg that was hollow and lighter than expected. A fisherman from 1469 also described finding what he thought was a dragon egg that was rounded at the top, pointed at the bottom, had 5 colors, and was the size of a human head. Now, there is a huge difference between these alleged descriptions and their actual established design in Chinese art, but I want to cover them during the art portion of this video. Being godlike divine beings, if not gods themselves, many classics, like the Ruh Yahye, say dragons have the most ling of any creature, which is the manifestation of the strongest Shen, or godlike powers, and as such, are attributed with an almost unlimited range of supernatural powers. One of the most revered was their control over water and weather, reinforced by the droughts, floods, great downpours, turbulent winds, and hail or lightning storms they were thought to be responsible for, though they were also varyingly thought to embody and alter other natural elements. According to Wang Fu, their saliva was more fragrant than any other perfume, and can be breathed out into clouds which they can use to conceal themselves. The Yu Huan Qi Wen, however, says their spit hardens in the sun, initially being white before gradually turning purple and darkening to black, as well as evaporating into blue smoke when burnt. Like Western dragons, Wang Fu also wrote that they could breathe fire, yet their fire burnt more strongly if touching water, and was easily put out by regular fire. They could also magically fly through the air, with Wang Fu stating how their Qimu is what enabled this. Chinese dragons were also frequently connected with the number 9, which was auspicious for being the number of the heavenly realm of Tian. Other than the 9 chimeric characteristics it sometimes had, its 117 scales were mathematically equal to 9 times 13. 81 of their scales equated to 9 times 9 and embodied positive yang essence, while the other 36 equated to 9 times 4 and were of negative yin essence. This connection to the yang is sometimes thought to give them other powers, such as bioluminescence or warding off anything connected to yin essence. As they are associated with the wuxing, the particular colors of dragons were intricately connected with the seasons, the elements, the cardinal directions, and their symbolisms, which I have listed here to save time. Compensating for no concrete size, the Guanzi stated they could change their size from as small as a silkworm to as big as the universe itself. In relation, Chinese dragons could take on an unlimited amount of forms, whether it be other creatures, inanimate objects, or even water and colored mist, as well as a hybrid form, combining a humanoid body with a dragon's head, scales, and claws. When disguised as animals, they still retained human speech and may inadvertently reveal themselves by emanating a 5-colored light. One passage also says they can't keep themselves polymorphed when first born, sleeping, angry, or lustful. Whatever powers they had, the Shui King Tu proposed gold dragons were the most quintessential of Shen and chief among other dragons. However, according to L. Newton Hayes, their abilities and vitality remained strong as long as they were wet, drying out and dying if they stayed away from water too long. They are also commonly shown having a large pearl that is known by many names, including the Qian Qin, or Pearl of 1,000 Pieces in the Chuangzi, and Lei Chu, or Thunder Pearl by 9th century Taoist priest Tu Kuang-ting. An earlier 6th century writer asserted that dragons spat out these pearls and that they had enormous value, with some stories showing that they were bright enough to illuminate an entire house. Although described in Chinese classics as concealed under their chins or within their throats, they are mostly shown in Chinese art alongside dragons or within their claws while set aflame. Though it mainly represents the sun or moon, the latter having more connections to water, it is also unevenly connected with spiritual energy, wisdom, prosperity, power, and immortality. Dragons were also sometimes thought to leave invisible traces of themselves, called dragon paths, and that people who built their homes or buried their dead on one of these courses would prosper in some way. Wise and intelligent, ancient Chinese natural history and zoology placed them above all living creatures alongside man, and the king of all scale-covered animals, as well as having dominion over all aquatic creatures. Chinese classics also frequently reference them as being sharp-sighted, and this developed into a widespread conviction that they could see a blade of grass clearly from 100 li, or 35 miles, away. As godlike creatures, some believed dragons were immortal and simply cast away their skins and bones every 1,000 years instead of dying, though other sources say they can be killed, or even become crabs after death for some weird reason. Chinese dragons were also, somehow, sexually compatible with other creatures, with many stories describing resulting draconic hybrids. One of the most infamous examples is Liu Beng of the Han Dynasty, who was allegedly born after his mother made out with a red dragon in a dream, supposedly being the reason he had draconic features, like a high nose, whiskers, and a strange beard. Being one of the 4 holy beasts alongside the qilin, fengguang, and the turtle, Chinese dragons are almost always seen as noble and friendly creatures who protect and help people alongside prominent characters. Under the servitude of the Jade Emperor, they were especially responsible for water-related weather phenomena that agricultural life depended on, with the prosperity they provided also making them bringers of wealth and good fortune. In relation, their divinity made them symbols of many positive attributes, as well as manifestations of male vigor via their masculine traits, with their appearance alone heralding the birth of great sages and rulers. According to a belief recorded in the Yiqian Zhou 2, dragons appeared in the Yellow River at the rise of a new emperor, with their colors indicating his worthiness, though in most cases their color was irrelevant. They also held dominion on every 12th hour, day, month, and year in Chinese geomancy, and remained significant in some of China's more formal religions. In Chan Buddhism, a dragon appearing from behind a cloud was a symbol of truth and the difficulty of seeing it clearly. For Taoists, they represented the central omnipresent force of Tao, coalesced into a single rain and weather god known as Long Wang, the Dragon King. Within the Taoist pantheon, he is regarded as the zoomorphic representation of the masculine yang power of generation, as well as a tutelary deity who was sometimes the king of all other dragons. Despite their inherent benevolence, there is a darker side to Chinese dragons that many today overlook. Their appearance, for instance, could still inspire fear and be read as bad omens in specific circumstances. The death of an emperor was said to be foretold by the sight of a dead dragon, or one appearing at a wrong time, such as when the Son of Heaven hasn't walked in the Tao yet, and the wrong places, such as if one came from a commoner's well rather than a royal one. Floods, tempests, and thunderstorms may also be caused by dragons fighting, with the resulting damage foreboding inundation, disorder, war, or the dynasty's fall. In the Yihlin, onlooking travelers would suffer hardships if 6 dragons fought in an embankment and an azure or gold dragon did not win. Outside of omens, Han Fei reinterpreted dragons as non-sapient animals that can be approached and ridden on, yet kill whoever touches their aforementioned throat scales. According to Wang Fu, males would cry out and rouse the wind when their eggs hatched, and females repeatedly calmed it down, causing climatic disarray. Bad weather may also be caused by inactive lazy dragons who hid in trees, under house roofs, or in people's clothes, little weirdos. The Xiu Shen Qi also warned how sick dragons may create bad-smelling rain that spoiled crops. Dragons also sent bad weather to punish whoever angers or neglects them, especially with droughts, with people taking great care to avoid offending them. Though Buddhism also introduced the idea of there being evil dragons. Whatever the reason, problematic dragons were often dealt with by the Order of Heaven itself. Minor offenses, in some traditions, were punished by having their ears cut off, while major ones resulted in them being banished to the earth and left to dry up and die far from water. Lightning was also sometimes believed to be sacred fire sent from heaven to stop dragon fights, taking the form of house-sized fireballs that unfortunately brought more devastation. A less brutal response came from the Huanlongxi, or dragon rearers. Otherwise called Yilongxi, or dragon tamers, they were mythological families who often helped emperors when dragons caused trouble, with their origins detailed in a legend recorded in the Zuo Chuan. The legend described a man named Shihnan of Liu, who was very fond of dragons and took care of those who sought refuge. With his knowledge of their likes and dislikes, he was able to help Emperor Shun and was granted the surname Tong and the family name Huanlong, becoming the first of the dragon rearers. Whether good or bad, Chinese dragons are sometimes given likes and dislikes that may play into their behavior. Swallow meat is frequently mentioned as being their most favorite food, so much so that they made no exceptions if someone or something merely smelled like roasted swallows, though arsenic was another favorite treat of theirs. Aside from their pearls, they also love the vital spirit of copper and other precious stones, such as a water-filled hollow stone called Keong Tsing, or Stone of Darkness. Bamboo plants were sometimes thought to be pleasing to their keen eyes, as well as delight in simply lying under their shade or listening to their leaves rustle in the wind. When assumed to be purely male, they were also very lewd creatures who lusted after young women. On the other hand, iron is commonly referenced as something that scares them, with the author of the Tian Cheng Qi speculating that its pungent aura overwhelms their sharp eyes. Tigers are considered their eternal rival, so much so that they are scared off by the mere presence of tiger bones. Other things that warded them away include 5-colored silk threads, a plant called China berry, centipedes, wax, and garbage. Any and all bodies of water were thought to be home to at least one dragon, ruling from beautiful submerged palaces and commanding courts of aquatic creatures. According to Wang Fu, dragons reassigned their territories on every 17th day of the 3rd month during summer, hibernating in their watery lairs during autumn and emerging to bestow rain in spring. This was proposed to explain why rain may fall on one man's field but not the other, the presiding dragon seeing fit to bestow rain without crossing the boundary of another who doesn't. In relation, coastal hurricanes and typhoons were sometimes thought to be the dragons returning and reappearing from their homes, with Wang Fu claiming they screamed when rain was to be expected. In the Shi Qiu Qi, whole assemblies of dragons also made intervals between the Han River and the Eastern Sea for 3 days, coming together at a blue smoke temple on an island in the center called Fangchang. A 6th century author also said there was a mass grave of dragon bones on an islet in what is now Guangdong province, and others in mountains, cavernous cliffs, hillocks, and caves. Now, outside the generic Chinese dragon, many say there are, officially, 9 different types of Chinese dragon. However, the usual list isn't necessarily perfect, as it includes dragons who are consistently described as single individuals rather than a different species, namely Huanglong, Qinglong, and the Dragon King Longwang. Though different kinds of dragons are referenced in Chinese myths and literature, their descriptions, or even their linguistic use, aren't always consistent. I won't go into too much detail on them, because most are not described in a way that differentiates them from any other Chinese dragon, with the others deserving their own video. Though most believe it means harness dragon, the etymology of the word qi in its name is a little obscure and can have several meanings, and texts like these only briefly mention it. However, it is implied that they are like any other dragon, aside from just lacking horns, as they draw divine chariots and swim through water no differently. Also simplified as Qiu or Jiu, Chinese dictionaries give the name 3 definitions: horned dragon, hornless dragon, and curling or coiling, and texts continuously shifted between the horned and hornless definition. Meaning flying dragon, Chinese classics frequently use the name for any generic dragon that can fly or is seen flying. first appearing in the 5th to 3rd century BCE, Yijing, as a metaphor for good or accomplished people. However, in certain 3rd century works, the name was also used for other things, such as the music master of Zhuanshu in Luxi Chengqi, and a geographic variant of the mountain spirit Feifei in Bao Puzi. In Chapter 4 of the 2nd century BCE Huainanzi, Feilongs are credited as the progenitors of birds when discussing animal evolution, and later works associate it with mythical dragon-headed birds such as the long chui, or dragon sparrow, in the Xi Jingfu and Bi Zheng. Also simplified as Jiao, many different etymologies have been proposed for this name, with Michael Carr claiming they are all unsupported speculations. Some thought Jiao and Long in the name referred to two different kinds of dragons paired together, while others thought this would make it hard to distinguish the two, and others, erroneously, used kraken or even mermaid to suggest a distinct oceanic monster. As such, it is conventionally translated as scaly dragon or flood dragon, and given qualifiers to help indicate a subtype of dragon, which deserves its own episode. Meaning responsive dragon, the name referred to both any winged dragon and a specific dragon character frequently mentioned in Chinese classics. The design of Yinglong has been found in bronzeware from as far back as the Shang and Zhou dynasty, having once been the official imperial symbol of China. Although it is still used this way in the West, it is no longer seen as such and has been regulated to a symbol of culture. This is because it was historically overtaken by Huanglong, a yellow dragon most often representing the mythohistoric Chinese sovereign Huangdi, with Zhou dynasty scholar Chang Zeng describing how its wings became the flame-like patterns of more recent depictions. The heavy losses to Chinese civilization during the Warring States period, however, finally made people forget Yinglong in favor of Huanlong as China's imperial symbol. Scholar Xiao Kongrong, though, proposed that Yinglong's change into Huanglong was a continuous and irreversible process, yet his presence remained in later Chinese myths. In Chapter 4 of Huainanzi, Yinglong is used to explain animal evolution alongside Feilong as the progenitor of mammalian quadrupeds, being given 4 wings to explain the 4 limbs of other beasts. Also called Fulong, the name roughly means heavenly dragon, celestial dragon, or divine dragon, and as such, they are generic dragons associated with the Chinese heavenly realm Tian, who guard the heavenly palaces of the gods and serve as their mounts or pull their chariots. The Benkao Gangmu also uses it as a name for the constellation Draco, and suggests the pearls kept under their chins might have derived from Draco's relationship to the North Pole star. The same text also uses it as another name for centipedes. Meaning god dragon or divine dragon, the name was connected to both a single dragon god and an alleged dragon species, though both versions are equal in significance to Tianlong. When described plurally, they are azure-colored dragons who govern weather and rain, which aren't unique to any other generic dragon. As a god, Shenlong was a draconic thunder god with a human head and a drum-like belly. Meaning coiling dragon, it was another aquatic dragon used in Chinese classical texts from the Han Dynasty, the first coming again from the Huainanzi, where it is a decorative style in Chinese bronze. In his dictionary, Fangyang, Western Han Dynasty philosopher Yang Xiong defined the Panlong as a dragon who did not ascend to heaven yet, being paralleled with the Jiaolong in the 2nd century CE Shangshu Dazhuan. The 12th century CE B.G. Manji also described its use in sympathetic magic, where its image was drawn on the back of a mirror and worshipped to summon rain. Meaning Earth Dragon, it was the only other flightless dragon aside from Panlong. It first occurred in The History of the Southern Dynasties, a mid-7th century CE biography of the Liang dynasty by Admiral Wang Sengbian. The text described how witnesses saw 2 dragons fly into the sky, the Earth Dragon, hypocritically, being one of them, and that it foretold their defeat in 550 CE. It was also an elegant name for an earthworm, with Ming Dynasty naturalist Li Shijian noting how this derived from myths saying that earthworms could alter the clouds and weather like dragons did. Also called Fu Kanglong, the name roughly means underworld dragon, as these were generic dragons who guarded both natural and man-made buried treasures. Like any generic dragon, its most prized possession was a magic pearl, and volcanoes were attributed to these creatures bursting from the ground to report to heaven. I also found other dragons outside of this list, the Shen, the Tengxie, and maybe the Hong, which are deserving of their own entries too. There are some instances where these different types are redescribed as variants of a single dragon, especially when the name Long is distinguished from them. In the early 6th century CE Shu Yiji, some are listed as the different stages of a dragon's life cycle, with Roy Bates describing the Jiao state in this context as resembling a serpent with a carp's head and scales. In the 1833 study Xiao Wen Tongshun Dingsheng, only male dragons were horned and named according to how many horns they had, with Qi being hornless, Jiao being one-horned, and Qiu having 2 horns. Other classification systems also exist. The Buddhist work Su Men Tsang King alternately gives 5 dragon classes: crow dragons, toad dragons, horse dragons, fish dragons, and snake dragons, with the latter being the most principal of them all. The colorations of dragons were also used to categorize them in some way. In one legend, they were said to be born from 1,000-year-old gold nuggets corresponding to a certain color, which would then play into the color of the spring and clouds they formed afterwards. Emperor Huizong of the Song dynasty canonized a completely different system where they represented different kings, each bestowing a certain blessing. Different parts of their bodies were also believed to have special properties, and as such, the ancient Chinese thought they could be used for certain benefits. Dragon bones, for example, are renowned in Chinese traditional medicine and extensively recorded in the Pencao Kangmu. Allegedly found mostly in what is now Shanxi and Sichuan province, bones of certain colors were valued differently, with some being too poisonous for use and all needing to be kept away from fish and iron utensils. Certain bones found to be impure were also thought to be worthless, such as those with veins running lengthwise or those gathered by women. That did not age well at all. Whatever was used, they were prepared differently by practitioners, but most required them to be rubbed into powder to be used as medicine. I won't go into detail on these practices, but here's a list of ailments dragon bone medicines were thought to cure, and another that instead suggested differently colored bones corresponded to organs they cured. Now, in reality, the dragon bones of Chinese medicine are really fossils of extinct dinosaurs and mammals, which played a part in reinforcing their belief and are still used by villagers in central China to this day. Other parts and organs, as shown in this list, were thought to cure other ailments. Other beliefs are known outside of the Pencao Kang Mu. According to L. Newton Hayes, their whiskers were thought to have multiple uses if mounted on a crystal handle like a horsewhip. The Yu Yang Tsa Tzu says their blood becomes amber when touching the earth, or rubies in other legends. In Nan Pu Sin Shu, their fat could make silk garments waterproof, yet in other traditions, dragon fat burned so brightly that its light could be seen from 100 miles away. Perfume made from dragon spit was said to be strong enough to hide bad smells for several tens of years, with dragon rearers in certain stories harvesting it by having dragons salivate at the sight of cooked swallows. In a story from Lang Huen Qi, dragon spit could also be mixed with the fruit of a plant called herb of the Xian, creating a red liquid that can eat through gold and jade and be used as ink on tablets. Dragon skin also retained their bioluminescence after being shed, with an 11th century story describing a whole cicada-sized skin found on a branch that sounded like precious stones when hit, glowing bright enough to be used as a torch. Many of these colorful ideas hypocritically imply that some people thought dragons had to be occasionally killed for these products, despite also worshipping them as gods. In pre-modern times, many Chinese villages had shrines and temples called miao that were dedicated to local dragon gods, especially those living close to water. During droughts or floods, it was customary to conduct religious rites as ritualized requests for changing the weather. Different rituals abound between communities. Some were meant to appease them, and others, instead, to scare or annoy them into making it rain or stopping it. Many are still held on the 5th and 6th moon of the lunar calendar, especially on Long Wang's birthday during the 13th day of the 6th moon. Belief in their power to bestow rain persists even into the modern day, and some, like those associated with the dragon dance of the New Year festival, were thought to also ward off illness and grant protection, good fortune, and even financial prosperity, depending on the procession's length. Though I won't be going over them all until later in the video, here's a couple that did not make it into my finalized version. In the Yu Yang Tsa Tzu, one ritual requires taking 4 water lizards, assumed to be dragons if not related to them, and placing 2 in an earthen jug filled with water. The jugs were then covered in wooden lids before being placed separately in quiet spots, with seeds placed in front and behind them, as well as incense. Poor lizards. In stories of families with more than 10 boys, each of which being up to 10 years old, striking a dragon's jaws incessantly with small bamboo sticks was believed to bring rain. In the Wu Tsa Tzu, the people of Lingnan are recorded using the dragon's lust for women to their advantage, where a naked woman is placed on an elevated point in a body of water to attract a dragon. As soon as one appeared, somehow the dragon is magically blocked from the woman, and it brings rain in its fury. Sometimes, beautiful women were also sacrificed as offerings or bribes to them, with records of maidens, unfortunately, being thrown into lakes or drowned at sea. Because tigers were their natural enemy, throwing tiger bones or pulling a tiger through a river could also irritate them into triggering a storm, as well as loud music, dancing, and the aforementioned things they don't like, such as iron or garbage. Many Chinese primogenitors, like Shennong and Huangdi, were closely affiliated to dragons, and as such, the Chinese sometimes called themselves the descendants of the dragon, and contributed to its use as a symbol of imperial power. It also partially stemmed from how dragons were seen as above mortals for their rise into the heavens, with Chinese emperors likened to dragons themselves. Certain legends and propaganda also elevated this connection to be more literal, whether it was just having a dragon-shaped birthmark, being born from them, or even being dragons themselves disguised in human form. Like I said before, the number of claws they had carried between dynasties depending on the symbolism the ruler of the time gave them. However, during the Ming Dynasty, the Hongwu Emperor introduced the five-clawed dragon for its association with the five elements, as well as to avoid influences from the Mongols and emulate the Yuan Dynasty. He also established rules on the dragon's use, being a capital offense for anyone other than the emperor to use the gold five-clawed dragon. Such offenders were punished by the execution of their entire clan, though these rules were not always adhered to. The five-clawed dragon would later disappear until the Manchus of the Qing dynasty brought it back in 1712, as well as used them for everything that had to do with the emperor's life, be it the throne he sat on or the commands he gave. Emperors could still also award the use of extra claws and did so freely, though some non-nobles still gave their dragons extra claws without permission. In response, Qing dynasty rulers issued edicts ordering unauthorized extra-clawed dragons to be deleted. As symbols of strength, they were also prevalently worn as tattoos, especially in criminal organizations where they held a meaning of their own. It was believed one must be fierce and strong enough to earn the right to wear one on their skin, lest their luck be consumed by the dragon. As symbols of fortune and luck, dragons were often engraved on utensils and items to attract the best that life had to offer. However, in some circles, it is considered bad luck to depict a dragon facing downwards, especially from how disrespectful it was to place them in a way that doesn't allow them to ascend into the sky. Feng Shui also capitalized on the powerful energy of dragons, and it is thought that they can be placed in the north and east sector of one's home for good luck in one's career. They were also thought to protect and accumulate wealth when placed in the southeast sector, and in the southwest sector alongside Feng Guangs to ensure harmonious, balanced unions and a happy marriage through their perfect yin-yang duality. Within the Chinese zodiac, dragon years are usually the most popular to have children and are characterized by having higher birth rates than any other sign, despite it being the fifth animal. There's a fun story behind why the dragon became the fifth animal in the Chinese zodiac, but I won't go over it here in this video. The deep meanings they had are ancient, so much so that no one knows exactly where their legends came from. It is speculated that the first representations of dragons were jade artifacts known today as zhulong, or pig dragons. These were zoomorphic forms with the heads of boars and elongated limbless bodies coiled around to the head in a suggestively fetal position. Earlier examples were thick and stubby, and later ones were more graceful and snake-like. Coming from the Hongshan culture and dating around 4700 to 2900 BCE, they were most often found at grave sites alongside pig bones, suggesting that pigs had some ritual significance. The character for dragon in the earliest Chinese writing has a similar coiled form to the pig dragon, as well as later jade dragon amulets from the Shang dynasty. However, dragon-like depictions have also been found extensively in earlier Neolithic period archaeological sites throughout China, such as a seashell dragon mosaic from the Shishuipo burial site in Puyang associated with the Yangshao culture. This only reinforces how much of a universal facet they were in ancient Chinese cultures, even when traditions and significances differed. Some additionally believe their pearl was derived from beliefs that some dragons held or chased the sun, initially represented in Chinese art as a red flaming ball before gradually becoming a pearl. However, there are also traces of the importance of pearls in early Taoism, best preserved as the jewel of the sacred lotus in Buddhism. Another hypothesis claims they may have been inspired by real animals like crocodiles. Historical geographer Dr. Richard Irving opined that crocodile worship was very common in Southeast Asia, and that South China Neolithic people migrated from Southeast China to the north long before Han people merged their festivals with their own ideas of dragons, though not everyone agrees. Support for this idea comes from archaeological findings from the Shang and Zhou dynasty with engravings that Roy Bate described as crocodile-like dragons. Though at the making of this video, I personally didn't find other articles on this. References to crocodile attacks during the Han and Song dynasty indicate their presence in the Lower Pearl River, Han River, Min River, portions of coastal Guangxi province, and Hainan Island. While it was once believed these were from historic encounters with saltwater crocodiles, which may have once inhabited coastal areas from northern Fujian province to the border of Vietnam, more recent studies may indicate these refer to the now extinct giant South China gavialid, Hanyusuchus. Again, I didn't read into this further, so there isn't much else I can say. Chinese scholar Wen Yiduo also suggested its chimeric description is based on the political union of several different tribes with animal totems, thus being a symbolic representation of their assimilation into a single nation. This, however, does not explain their appearance long before such political associations existed in early Chinese communities. As I finally wrap up this segment, I just want to confirm that the only thing I decided to not cover in this video are their roles in Chinese creation stories. In the last episode about Tiamat, I introduced what I called creation events, major moments where an area is magically altered thanks mostly to the gods presiding over it. Whether random or by design, in my modern mythologies, magic across different places around the world has some basic uniform properties, yet alters their surroundings in different ways, all of which depending on what I find when researching topics for this series. For now, I will call the magical nature of a given area in this fictional scenario its magisphere, which is determined by the creation event responsible for it. That being said, many Chinese creation stories feature dragons being responsible for creating the world, or at least helping other characters and deities doing the same. As such, I can't come up with a more cohesive narrative without first looking into these different stories and thinking about how they could work with one another. Despite this, I do have some semi-thought-out ideas from reading about dragons in other cultures, and some hints here and there while researching for this video. My idea at first was that the different dragon species would have each directly spawned from Tiamat's essence the same way their monstrous children were born, which was my way of explaining why their features look so chimeric. However, I gradually decided to rework this story and incorporate some natural history into their supernatural origins. In my new narrative, Tiamat's essence instead coalesced into the first true dragon, a magically altered and chimeric creature from which all modern dragon species descended from. What this ancestor looked like is something I can only conceptualize with a larger sample size of different dragons, but its rapid development into other more derived forms would be prompted by a mix of both natural and unnatural selection. As I explained before, the classification of 9 Chinese dragon types is not perfect. With the exception of the Jiaolong, there isn't much that truly distinguishes them from each other, unless referring to life stage, horn count, or their jobs. In light of this, I decided that there are instead officially 3 species of dragon existing in China: the Jiao, the Shen, and the Long, which is the principal and most powerful of them. I haven't confirmed whether the aforementioned Tengxie and Hong are also 2 other dragon species or just names of unique individual entities. But until I find the time to do so, I will only be focusing on the Long for this episode. Now, I've explored enough dragons in my spare time to have most of a cladogram figured out, with Chinese dragons belonging to a taxonomic group I call the East Asian dragons, or sinospheric dragons, which would also include Korean Yongs, Japanese Ryus, Vietnamese Rongs, and possibly the dragons of Iranian art and literature. Because Longs are capable of growing wings at a certain age, I decided that East Asian dragons as a whole would have an evolutionary relationship with the classical winged and fire-breathing drakes of European traditions, and like them, most members in this group are also sapient races with culture and civilization. This is all I can say at this time, but for now, I can finally describe my process for fleshing this creature out in my art. Like I said before, different artists and writers had their own interpretations of what these dragons looked like. But there is one description I've seen consistently used in some traditional paintings and statues, which I will present bit by bit as I show my design choices. Some features match with the aforementioned textual descriptions, and others have nothing to do with them, starting with the head. Their snouts varied between short and long, but I preferred something in between. Just long enough to not look like an overgrown pug, but not too long and narrow either. The lips may also either be straight or curvy, but one shape I liked in particular was where they only curved at the front of the jaws, similarly to that of some mammals. Their mouths are often shown to be very wide, with a combination of fangs, flat mammalian teeth, and 2 curved fang-like tusks at the end. The one place I thought these tusks could grow from was at the corner of the jugular, close to the edge of where the end of the lips extend to. Going back to the front of the jaws, all Chinese dragons have large bulbous noses that may almost look human-like, and the chin is sometimes pronounced too. The nose was particularly challenging, and I made several attempts with older art in high school. The official design of Ghidorah from the Monsterverse is what helped in the end, as well as the pronounced brow ridge and forward-facing eyes that can also be seen in Chinese art. Just like in Wang Fu's description, their horns do branch like a deer's, but they aren't shaped exactly like one, and they often have multiple different forms, some with sharp tips and others with blunt, rounded ones. My favorite is where they curve towards the back of the head with 2 or 3 branches, and I decided that different shapes could be justified by differently aged dragons, with older Long growing more branches. Finally, they also have cow-like mammalian ears, just like Wang Fu described, as well as a pair of tendril-like whiskers under each nostril, though I did not draw it here. Wang Fu also claimed they had a bump on their heads called a chimu, but this isn't something I've seen in any traditional Chinese art, so I decided their chimu would be something more esoteric. I first sketched this bald version to have as a reference for future projects, but I also drew a version complete with one of their most defining features, hair. So Chinese art will often show them with one of or all of the following features: a small mustache under their noses, a beard growing along their lips, bushy eyebrows, and a mane behind their heads, which I applied here. Their manes may sometimes have a teardrop shape where it starts to curve into a tip at the ends, or it might be wavy and wide. I personally like the former, since it doesn't make their heads look disproportionately small. Now, scale shape isn't something I always see with specific details, but I sometimes saw a ridge between the nose and brow, which I decided to apply here. Now for the body. All East Asian dragons as a whole have 4 limbs and serpentine bodies, which were normally long enough to curve into a single arch when standing. Although Wang Fu said each section of their bodies were of equal length, I personally didn't like the sound of those proportions and came up with my own. I also didn't want their bodies to look too thin or thick like in some versions, nor did I want the limbs to look too small or stubby looking. It took several attempts, and for some reason, the final's length looked comparatively shorter when stretched out, no matter how many times I measured with a ruler. Chinese art also shows them with additional tufts of fur on their elbows, their ankles, and at the ends of their tails. And just as Wang Fu stated, their scales are shaped like a carp's, though I didn't draw them here. Their eagle-like talons also match, with 5 becoming the current established number on both their forepaws and hindpaws. The one description from Wang that I found confusing was them having bellies like a clam, but Chinese art does show their belly scales being somewhat clam-shaped. For some reason, I've seen many modern artists draw them with a mane of fur running down their length, but this isn't something I've seen in traditional designs. Rather, they have what looks like a wavy dorsal fin, akin to a fish, which makes sense when considering their connection to water, with my design modeled after the good imugi from D-War. There's a specific reason why I drew its body with a straightened out section behind the forelimbs with a keel and scapula. Regardless of what dragon I make art of, I want them all to share some features with each other as a way to tie them all together the same way different species in the same taxonomic group do. As such, I based both their limb and chest anatomy on my final design of a classical dragon. Since Longs can grow wings, I needed to make space for the section in which these wings would grow from, along with all the needed internal anatomy. Now, Chinese dragons are mostly said to be able to fly with magic or divine power, so even if they could grow wings, it's not like they would need them. As such, I first used my design for Western dragon wings to figure out a proper wingspan, one that was not as proportionately big as a true flying creature would be, but perhaps large enough to at least help in steering. So, when reading about Yinglong, his wings are sometimes described as being bird-like and feathered, but in Chinese art, they look more like bird-shaped fish fins, which I drew accordingly. I was aiming for a wing shaped somewhat like my classical dragons, but I accidentally made the first digit of the wing the longest, since that is what is mostly seen in Chinese art. So I won't be doing the same in future drawings. The presence of wings would affect how their bodies would curve, especially when folded. And this is why I straightened out this section of their torso when sketching. For wingless longs, I'll just be keeping the thickness of the chest the same, but have it curve closer to where the shoulders are. Speaking of which, when not having wings, Chinese art frequently shows them with flames coming from their shoulders and hips. Though no later sources even make mention of why they have this feature, the historic connection to wings on older designs tells me they might have something to do with their magical flight. I established this connection while I was finalizing their color. So like I said previously, longs are mostly colored according to the wuxing. This includes red, yellow or gold, blue or green, black, and white. But I've also seen orange, pink, purple, and even brown dragons. Even then, their horns, hair, fins, belly scales, eyes, noses, lips, paws, and flames are variously colored depending on the dominant body color. My favorite color scheme is a gold dragon with green hair, blue fins, brown horns, and a pink underbelly. While coming up with a final color, I also explored multiple shades of those colors and the extra complementary colors of their noses and lips, as well as the scales on their paws and the bridge of their noses. I wanted those colors to be different, yet also blend more closely and look more like a part of the body rather than how bold and flashy they are in temple art. The exception is their flames, which for gold dragons is most often red, and this goes back to how Wang Fu said their fire was a magical form. Just so you know, I did the same thing with every single other morph. Instead of red, blue, and green, I chose vermilion, azure, and jade, as these colors are more associated with Chinese culture, and the only constant I kept between them was their whiskers, which I decided to make purple just like L. Newton Hayes described, despite it not appearing in Chinese art. Although I won't be presenting their origins and involvement in China's creation events, there's still a lot of material describing their abilities and behavior, even if they may contradict each other. I did my best to base its lore on everything we discussed, while also changing some things to make them more consistent. I also filled any gaps with the behaviors of saltwater crocodiles and sea snakes, a general script on classical dragon behavior I use as a basis, and a few elements inspired by the bronze, silver, and gold dragons of Dungeons and Dragons. Some of the things I couldn't explain further in previous sections, like the specific traditions for worshipping them, are also included in their description, And all research and media sources used in this video are cited accordingly at the end of this video. Longs are one of the most renowned and revered sapient dragon races in China and the world over, with their notoriety rivaling classical dragons in the West. Compared to other dragons, they have more mammalian features in their faces, including bulbous noses, pronounced eyebrows, and a combination of long fangs, incisors, and molars in their jaws, as well as two fang-like tusks growing from the edge of their maxilla. They also have a pair of long, fleshy whiskers flowing from under their nostrils, large piercing eyes, cow-like ears, manes of hair growing from behind their heads, and curved branching horns which are thicker in males than females. Males may additionally grow beards that outline their lips. Majestic and beautifully graceful, these dragons have long serpentine bodies and 4 muscular limbs, each with 5 digits ending in eagle-like talons and tufts of fur on their elbows, ankles, and the tips of their tails. A fin-like mane stretches from the back of their heads to the end of their tails, and their bodies are covered in carp-like iridescent scales, with belly scales shaped like clamshells. Patches of fire also emanate from their shoulders and hips, and certain longs called yinglong also have a pair of membranous wings, similarly to classical dragons. Their colorations are extremely variable, with the most common including vermilion, gold, jade, azure, black, and white, as well as rarer shades like orange, brown, lilac purple, and peach pink. The colors of their hair, horns, belly scales, dorsal fins, flames, and several other details are also differentiated between different longs, with a multitude of combinations existing for just one morph. However, the whiskers of all long remain the same shade of purple. Their bones were also varyingly colored in red, yellow, green, blue, black, and white, and their vocalizations have been compared to the sound of copper pans clashing together. The magical radiation of the many entities from the heavenly kingdom of Tian is known in China as Ling, and longs are so heavily infused with it that they could potentially outmatch the gods themselves. Their ling is spread all across their bodies from a concentration of magical energy in their heads called the Qi-mu, enabling an unlimited range of supernatural powers. They can breathe fire like some other dragons, but their Qi-mu altered it into a magical form that ignites brighter when contacting external water. This fire also reacts with their sweet-smelling fragrant saliva to create a thick cloud-like mist, which they may use to conceal themselves. They can, however, keep their flames from reacting with their spit by controlling their throat muscles, weaponizing it like any other fire-breathing dragon. Their Qi-mu also creates an enchantment that allows them to levitate and fly through the air, reaching maximum speeds of 21 to 31 miles per hour. This visually appears as the flames on their shoulders and hips, which grow when these dragons fly higher or faster, and dim when they slow down. Longs also use this power to reduce strain when arching their bodies up and bringing their limbs closer for better movement. This is why their whiskers and tail seem to constantly drift in the air, how they move with the liquid grace of a dancer, why their bodies seem to radiate with a divine warmth, and why their flames never fully extinguish unless fast asleep. The wings of a yinglong only help in maneuverability when floating, but are not powerful enough to lift their bulk off the ground. Like chameleons, their skin is made up of several layers of chromatophores filled with different pigments, which they may use to seamlessly blend in with their surroundings. These cells, however, are not present in their whiskers, hair, or dorsal fin, so this camouflage only works if they coil themselves in certain positions. Their outer layer is transparent with similar cells, except they instead contain enchantments derived from the forces of both yin and yang. The yang energy releases intense light, while the yin energy ceases it, giving them a form of magical bioluminescence that they can switch on and off at will. Of all their powers, their most famed is their embodying and altering of natural elements. All longs share a hydrokinetic ability to control water in all its forms, as well as water-oriented weather phenomena, such as rain, hail, snow, and lightning. The quality of the water they summon also correlates with their mood and health, being pure and enriching at their prime, and becoming foul and toxic if sick. Certain longs could control other elements depending on what their color associated with in the wuxing. Azure and jade-colored long can enrich the growth of plant life, heal injuries, and pacify others into serene and restful states. These powers are strongest when in China's eastern regions and during spring. The fire-breathing of red and orange-colored long are enhanced via pyrokinesis, and they can induce strong positive emotions and vitality with their own charisma. These powers are strongest when in China's southern region and during summer. Unlike most dragons, white and pink-colored long are more in tune with the force of yang, and as such are more reposed, able to purify ailments and negativity with a single touch. These powers are strongest when in China's western regions and during autumn. Being more in tune with the force of yin, black and purple-colored long are more vengeful and channel it in their greater control over water and the destructiveness of their storms. These powers are strongest when in China's northern regions and during winter. Gold and brown-colored long don't have any additional powers, but their magical and natural abilities are comparatively stronger, more so when at the center of China and during the last month of summer. These dragons are masterful shapeshifters that can take on an unlimited amount of forms. Whether a living creature, inanimate object, or even water and colored mist, they could still use their powers and can talk if in animal form. When using a humanoid disguise, they often choose to either be young beautiful women or elderly men, as well as a hybrid form with their draconic heads, claws, tails, and skin. They can also alter their size to be as small as a silkworm or large enough to touch the sky. Longs find it difficult but not impossible to maintain their guises when feeling intense emotions like anger or lust, though they cannot shapeshift when asleep, laying eggs, or right after hatching. Thanks in part to the lings circulating their bodies, their forms are also sexually compatible and can result in hybrid offspring if they hold out. Longs are able to coalesce a small fraction of their ling into a pearl-like gemstone that they spit out from their throats. Known by many names including Longzu and Leizu, these pearls glowed as intensely as small suns and had different properties depending on the dragon that made them. Aside from these pearls, they also leave invisible traces of themselves wherever they go, which are believed by many to attract great prosperity if one builds their homes or buries their dead on these dragon paths. Different dragons, however, shift between either endorsing or denying it. Aside from their many magical powers, they also have some natural ones. Like most other dragons, Longs are intelligent and calculating creatures gifted with extraordinary memory, complex problem-solving, and fluency in topics they put their minds to. Aiding these are their heightened senses of smell, taste, touch, and especially sight. Their depth perception and peripheral night vision are also strong enough to see a blade of grass from 56 kilometers away, and their sharp 14 to 40,000 Hz hearing is kept in check through frequency selectivity. Longs have incredibly strong and complex muscles and dexterous paws, through which they can hold and use objects if not also crush them. Combined with a greater flexibility thanks to their many vertebrae and ribs, they could also coil around and constrict objects so long as their limbs are tucked. However, their long bodies limit their movement to crawling and walking with their backs arched up, and their coiling motions are further limited by their wings as Yinglong. They can, however, move 15 to 22 miles per hour in short bursts, and have a strong bite force of 26,371 newtons. One of their strangest traits is a particular immunity to arsenic. Their close association with water also corresponds to them being amphibious and able to swim as fast as they can fly, using currents to travel long distances, and Yinglong keeping their wings folded when swimming. Salt glands in their tongues allow them to be comfortable in both salt water and fresh water, and like crocodiles, they have palatal flaps in their throats that block out water. Although they have lungs and primarily breathe air, they can remain submerged indefinitely by absorbing oxygen from the surrounding water, similarly to some sea snakes and turtles. A dense network of blood vessels in their forehead and snout ensure enough oxygen is redistributed to their brains. This, however, means they are limited to ocean levels where oxygen is plentiful. A thin layer of blubber also helps them survive cold temperatures. A nictitating membrane in each eye keeps them protected when flying and swimming without sacrificing their acuity, with the other senses remaining keen even when submerged. Their whiskers are sensitive to touch and are covered in sensory pits through which they detect movement, pressure changes, and chemicals, able to respond to things as small as a single drop. When in water, their horns assist in hearing by detecting vibrations similarly to antennae. Whatever lungs can do, their abilities and vitality remain strong so long as they are wet, being susceptible to drying out and death if they stay away from water too long. Though gold and brown lungs can last longer without water, the ling of all dragons are dangerously weakened by iron and chinaberry. Certain creatures, like Garudas and tigers, are also more naturally adept at hunting and slaying these creatures than the gods of Tian themselves. These dragons are wise and noble creatures, with a literal connection to the world that informs an obligation to be its protectors, promoting goodness, honesty, and justice. They also strongly believe that law and order are absolute necessities for everyone's well-being and varyingly enacted upon a surrounding area, cooperating with local authority to ensure equanimity for all. It is for this reason that they serve under the Jade Emperor, equating his charges with their values and seeing Tian's potential with their guidance. They try to be gentle and friendly with other creatures as they uphold the welfare of others with humility and empathy. However, they are intolerant with disrespectful behavior and abhor acts of treachery, cruelty, and foul play, relentlessly pursuing whoever earns their fury. A rare few may dismiss others as willfully ignorant and turn tyrannical, punishing offenses with great downpours, floods, turbulent winds, lightning and hailstorms, and droughts. Even rarer still are Longs who lazily avoid their obligations and shrink to hide in trees, under house roofs, or in people's clothes. These dragons try to avoid taking lives unless absolutely necessary or under orders from Tian, as well as never interfering with legal executions so long as the punishment fits the crime, though they make exceptions when hunting non-sapient game. Although one of the few dragon races unclouded by base urges, they struggle composing themselves with swallow meat as it stimulates their predatory instincts, and intense emotions like anger may trigger them into unintentionally causing destructive weather, especially when fighting. Most, if not all, bodies of water in China are home to at least one Long, ruling from beautiful submerged palaces and commanding their own courts of aquatic creatures. Whether a part of or separate from their duties, they often test the goodwill of those they involve themselves with, and truly enjoy observing and helping other creatures when able to, though they may also remain polymorphed to avoid unwanted attention. They especially enjoy the company of those they find admirable or sagacious, or at least those who enforce law and morality. When given spare time, these dragons enjoy arsenic as a favorite treat and the sight of bamboo, whether it was lying under their shade or listening to their leaves rustle in the wind. They are also fond of copper metalworks and anhydroagates, either crafting them themselves or as gifts or offerings. Being fastidious, they also love keeping their homes organized and clean, and are easily put off by garbage. Another hobby of theirs is submitting themselves to formal magical training, spending countless hours studying and slowly developing their skills over the centuries. The rising temperatures of China's monsoon season provokes reproductive behavior. Longs choose romantic partners based on their virtuousness and valor, with prospective mates discussing each other's beliefs or questing together to test their application. Their marital laws are incredibly diverse and allow everything from lifelong arrangements, short temporary durations, monogamous pairs, to even polyamory. Their courtships take the form of several behavioral interactions, including snout rubbing and prolonged submissive displays, with mating always occurring in water. Females then lay 1 to 5 eggs at night in specially made nests of mud and vegetation with an even flow of water, with both parents celebrating their eggs hatching by crying out and riling up light storms. Although Long parents raised their young with exceptional care, it is also common for them to rely on others for a variety of reasons. Longs have a strong hierarchical system based on a rudimentary form of Zhao and Han Dynasty meritocracy, and host all their litigations and conferences in a blue smoking temple on the Isle of Changfeng in the center of the East China Sea. While they all follow the will of the Jade Emperor, they are directly governed by a leader spanning their entire race called the Longwang, or Dragon King, who acts as the Jade Emperor's mediator. They are elected based on one's knowledge and reputation, though nepotism is not completely prohibited, and 2 or more Long may be chosen together to share or alternate leadership. They create rules, settle disputes, offer counsel, and enforce judgment if required, with couples also seeking their approval to be mated and have children. Longwangs, however, mainly reassign or affirm the duties and hibernation periods of each Long, all during a 3-day mandatory meeting on August 17th. Main assignments are divided into the following. Tianlong are sent to Tian to serve both menial jobs, such as being the mounts of gods or pulling their chariots, and major ones like protecting their palaces. Shenlong are responsible for monitoring China's water and weather, spread between different territories that cannot be overlapped or intervened except in differing circumstances. And Fuzanglong are stationed as guards for both natural and man-made treasures. Other tasks may replace, precede, or coincide with these major obligations. Individual Longs may appoint themselves on certain quests so long as they received approval from the Longwang, or even rule over kingdoms as emperors. The Jade Emperor or other rulers of Tian may also send certain Long as liaisons to earthly kingdoms, especially as omens. Though their color was most often irrelevant, Tian once had a system where certain colored Longs appeared in the Yellow River to show the worthiness of a new governor. Black Longs only signified the local kingdom's support. White Longs meant the whole of China thought highly of them, and red, blue, or gold Longs represented Tian's own acceptance. Tian also sent Longs to appear in wrong places and times as bad omens. They also allow Tian to deal with Longs they deem problematic in however their laws see fit, cutting their ears off for minor offenses and banishing or executing them for major ones. They also let heaven involve themselves in their disputes, such as sending sacred fire or lightning to stop dragon fights, though this more often brings more devastation due to heaven's own negligence. Most Longs take villages and kingdoms living around their homes under their care, and many people in turn worship them for the prosperity they provide, erecting Miao temples for them as local rain deities. While most communities simply offer what these dragons liked to appease them or beseech their help, others had different rituals and customs according to their respective Long, each held on the 13th day of the lunar calendar's 6th moon. The Long Bei Yidong, or Movement of the Dragon Tablet, for example, is uniquely requested by Longs living in Changli County. A procession carries their image in a basket around communities, and pieces of papers are placed in front of houses written with a Long's title, which are then sprinkled with water using willow withers before burning incense alongside them. If the dragon was elected the current Long Wang, the phrase written would be "the position of the Dragon King of the 4 seas, 5 lakes, 8 rivers, and 9 streams." One of the most elaborate traditions was introduced by Taoist Long living in Heng Shui and Weifeng, who wanted differently colored Long venerated on their associated seasons. The most cosmopolitan practice is for any and all Long Wang, which is held on whenever their birthday is. A statue of a hybrid humanoid visage of them, made from bamboo wrapped in yellow paper or cloth, is worn by a person in a procession. Other people carried bamboo poles with prayers and fastened with yellow, green, black, and white flags, though one carried 2 buckets of water and sprinkled it on the ground with a bamboo branch. Everyone all the while cries out, "Let it rain," or "The rain is coming," until they arrive at their magistrate's house, who emerges to bow to the statue and offer incense. The procession also includes clanging gongs, blowing up firecrackers, and burning bonfires of paper money. Some people directly acquainted themselves with these dragons and founded the dragon rearers. These are families devoted to helping Longs carry out their agendas and alleviate misconduct between them and other creatures, being trusted to deal with troublesome Long and more often to raise their young in their stead. There are even instances where Longs and other sapient creatures engaged in cross-species relationships, which were once forbidden but are currently more tolerated, though special guidelines exist for couples wanting children. Longs who governed kingdoms introduced the use of their image to attract fortune and good luck, especially as decorative features in Chinese architecture, art, and craftsmanship. There were initial edicts to keep other races from unauthorized use, with some circles seeing an assumed tendency to portray them facing downwards as disrespectful, and others only rewarding permission to bear them as badges of honor. Their free use was then authorized by around 500 BCE during the Zhou dynasty, with mixed feelings and responses to the ever-changing claw count throughout the rest of China's history. There are still ambiguous opinions about their use as tattoos, especially when misapplied by criminals. Within feng shui, Long statues are encouraged to be placed in the north and east sector of one's home for good luck in a career. They were also thought to protect and accumulate wealth when placed in the southeast sector, and in the southwest sector alongside Feng Guang statues to ensure harmonious, balanced unions and a happy marriage through their perfect yin-yang duality. Despite being made the 5th creature in the Jade Emperor's zodiac, the Long who represented them is still celebrated today for how he won the emperor's favor whilst upholding their oath as China's protectors, as well as the resulting boon of their years having the most birth rates. Many Long and non-Long also honor the heroism of the 4 dragons who founded the Yangtze, Heilongjiang, Zhujiang, and Huanghe rivers, even though they chose to disobey the Jade Emperor. Having average lifespans of 2,000 years, the ontogenesis of these dragons is extremely metamorphic. Their eggs are 18 centimeters wide and resemble beautiful hollow and light gemstones that are rounded at the top, pointed at the bottom, and are striped with the 5 colors of the wuxing, all filled with embryonic fluid with the consistency and appearance of normal water. From there, the progression of each Long is divided into the following. Shuihu are the firstborn hatchlings of Long that superficially resemble normal snakes, having only small thin scales and lacking any horns, whiskers, hair, limbs, or any ling. Being non-sapient, they are placed in special creches designed to keep them enriched and fed with small prey. Growing whiskers and carp-like scales, they then grow into sentient juveniles called Jiaolong, who are initially curious, boisterous, and irrepressible before being schooled by their parents. They become more and more independent as they grow older. Those who reach adolescence become Panlong and grow limbs and hair. They also start to develop some of their magical abilities and are enrolled in special schools where they learn to moderate their power and train for the upcoming roles of an adult, though they still cannot fly. They then become Qiulong, or young adults completely formed with horns and all their magical powers, including flight. Although they are finally ready to go off on their own and involve themselves in Long politics, they are nowhere near the physical power of experienced elders and will seek out their place in society as they turn their attention towards adult responsibilities, given an interlude period to prepare themselves and establish a territory. By tradition, their first act upon leaving their parents is to swear fidelity to both the current Long Wang and the Jade Emperor himself, which is celebrated as a joyous occasion. However, there are a rare few Panlong who experience a developmental issue in their transition to adulthood. Some develop all their magical abilities yet remain hornless, labeled Qilong, and some that grow horns and all other powers but remain unable to fly, labeled Dilong. Adult Qiulong who somehow manage to live long past their average lifespan grow wings and become Yinglong, the oldest being a servant of Huangdi who lived up to 3,000 years and founded the term. All these variants are viewed differently by other Long. Although they abhor the unwarranted slaying of their kind, these dragons don't deny that their ling gives their bodies special beneficial properties. Entire industries have been founded by Longs licensed to ethically, sustainably, and moderately share these benefits alongside their main duties, as well as certain dragon rearer families who they solely put their faith in. Long bones have renowned medicinal properties when manufactured correctly, in which they are first boiled in hot water twice before ground into powder and wrapped in small bags, which are placed inside gutted swallows and left to hang over a well overnight. The color of each bone corresponded to the organs they cured. Along with being one of the 9 ingredients of specter-killing pills, they've been used to cure ailments including ulcers, intra-abdominal abscess, dysentery, gallstones, and remittent fever and convulsions. These, however, only applied to bones infused with the forces of Yang, with yin-associated bones being toxic and their identification kept secret. Their horns and teeth could also cure spasms and epileptic fits when ground and mixed with ginseng and kalbazor, but had the opposite effect with gypsum. It was once believed that their brains stopped dysentery, and placentas or fetuses cured blood diseases and illnesses in pregnant women, though longs have decisively proven these as false. Fake doctors may use dinosaur and Pleistocene mammal fossils relabeled as long remains when trying to sell cures, which longs also find offensive. Their sweet-smelling saliva is one of the most sought-after ingredients for perfume, which is strong enough to hide bad smells for several tens of years. They can also be made into special incense, as it releases blue fragrant smoke when burnt. One dragon rearer family figured out that mixing it with fruit from a plant called herb of the Seine created a red acidic solution that could eat through gold and jade, selling an expensive diluted form that can be used as ink to write on tablets. Long saliva also hardens into valuable gem-like stones when exposed to intense UV light, which is initially white when fresh but gradually turns purple before darkening to black. Their blood may also crystallize into ruby-like gems when alchemically mixed with earth. Their skin also retained bioluminescence when shed and could provide a clean source of light when properly prepared. Long fat is also unstable when mixed with water and burns so brightly that its light could be seen from 100 miles away. One man mistakenly thought it could make silk garments waterproof until he tried it on himself. Their whiskers were also falsely advertised to keep insects away when fastened on a crystal handle like a bullwhip and left in a room at night, as well as ward off animals when swished in the air and catch aquatic scale-covered animals when placed in water. Much like with living long, iron discharged the link that gave these remains their power, and so should be strictly kept away when manufacturing or using any long-derived products. During the Han Dynasty, the arrival of Buddhism introduced both the villainization and exploitation of long, with the Long's own retaliation worsening tensions and involving them in the dark ages of the Chaoskampf movement. They thankfully survived and greatly contributed to its end, returning their harmonious relationship with China's people from times past. The current Long Wang is a prominent member of the Draconic Council, becoming China's representative of global draconic affairs, while also maintaining strong relations with the Nagas.